like a butterfly flapping his wings deep down into the forest, man. It's gonna cause a tree fall like 5,000 miles away, man. There ain't nobody seeing nobody. Man, see, like, you don't even know, man. It's like you're born into this world, man. And you got like that, man. The dust and wind, man. Or like the dang old candle, man. It don't matter, man. It's all the time anyway.
All right, Tom Foe, welcome to the Jay Burden Show. How you doing, man?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me on, man. It's really appreciate the invite, and I'm excited for this conversation.
Yeah, dude, I am too. It's always fun. Like, the internet's a big place because every once in a while I discover like these sort of gems where it's like, I don't know how I've never seen your stuff before. You do a style of video that's, when I say it's like they don't make them anymore, I'm not insulting you. I'm saying I wish they would, but it's kind of a lost art on YouTube and Rumble, right? The videos you put out, they're well done. So yeah, man, I'm really excited to, be recommended your stuff and then to get you on the show.
Oh, man, well, I really appreciate that. And yeah, like a lot of people don't really do the type of content I do. It's just kind of simple and it's not overthinking it.
Yeah, it's interesting. It is sort of like, and I have a feeling we're roughly the same age. And so if proportionally to our lifespan, spend a lot of time on YouTube. Mm-hmm. And you sort of see these different trends, and this is kind of the era of like the 3-hour video, documentary on X or Y. Yeah, exactly. And, I'll enjoy some of that from time to time. But I do kind of miss the era of the response video, like yeah. Maybe it's nostalgia, but it is something you don't see much anymore.
Yeah, no, for sure. I can't do too many of the video essays anymore because they're like Netflix documentaries and it's way too much. I just like the more simpler stuff. There's a few other YouTubers who do this style of content, and they're actually the reason why I do it. They inspired me. Like Jimmy Talks is one of them for sure. He just puts gameplay and talks, and that's it.
Well, I mean, look, like a very similar reason to why I have an interview show. I saw other people doing it, and I was like, oh, I feel like I have something to add, or like I wish I could have said something. And writing out a YouTube comment, you realize really quickly, it's like, well, this is an unfulfilling waste of time. And I guess you can just do things, right? As the meme goes. Yeah, dude, I'm curious, and I'm not asking you to, give a super kind of detailed breakdown, but like, how do you get interested in politics? Because look, niche right-wing politics is bigger than it's ever been, but it's still not something that, every person you bump into is familiar with. So how do you end up here?
Well, I'm definitely just online all the time. That's number one. But I got into politics right before I turned 18. So I turned 18 the year Trump was running. So that was the first time I got to vote. And I got like super into the drama, and I became a pretty big Trump supporter, and I was just kind of energized. I feel like 2016 was a big energizing year for politics. A lot of people, even people who were older, got interested into it because it was kind of like a TV show. There was a lot of drama between the candidates, and you had the debates that were crazy. And then you had all the stuff happening online. Like 2016 was the first election, in my opinion, that was really kind of online. You had all the Facebook stuff, the Instagram stuff. You had stuff going on with like WikiLeaks, where they were leaking emails from the government and Hillary Clinton's emails. And then there was a big conspiracy with the Pizzagate stuff, with like all the trafficking. And so the first year I kind of got into politics, I was just online all the time, and I started getting into all these niche stories that were going on. And so I guess that's where it started. And then obviously you fast forward 4 years, you have Trump losing, and then you have all these people saying, well, it was stolen, and then it wasn't stolen, and then you have all the stuff with COVID. So it was just kind of, and I'm not alone here. I've talked to a lot of guys that are around my same age, and I feel like most young like men who kind of got into politics because of Trump, I feel like most of them are in a similar position to where I am, because there was always some niche story going on, whether it was Pizzagate or Jeffrey Epstein or the election being stolen or COVID, all these different conspiracies, things going on. You were always just kind of like in these niche groups talking about these things online. And so it just keeps pushing you further and further. And then in 2024, I voted for Trump for the third time, and I was pretty excited. And then this year, or at least last year, I kind of got a little bit more radicalized because I kind of figured the Trump admin wasn't doing what I kind of wanted them to do. And I'm not alone on that. I feel like they kind of dropped the ball. And so, I mean, the only reason I'm kind of where I am politically is just because there's been one story after another, or there's just been one disappointment after another from the establishment conservatives. And I don't, like the Democrats, so I'm just constantly getting pushed in the other direction, And it's kind of as simple as that, to be honest. It's just the Democrats hate white guys and they hate young dudes, and they push all this LGBTQ stuff on you. And then the Republicans don't really do that much better, and so you just kind of end up where I'm at.
Yeah, man, I missed the first Trump election by just a few months. I was too young to vote for it, but
Really?
I really remember. Yeah, just a little bit. But I remember being super swept up in it. And there was this other dynamic that made it really fun, because I was in a fairly conservative area, and it was a ton of fun watching like the older people, right? Like at my school or at, church or whatever kind of social gathering, get really upset and really offended by Trump. Right. And eventually, a lot of these people would kind of come around on it, but you saw that kind of like never Trumper thing. And that made it even more fun. Right. Because you could both annoy, the most irritating people in the world, liberals, and also like the president of your school or the principal of your school or whatever. And so that was really fun. So like, I know what you mean, that kind of like infectious, it felt like, this was like a way to both, do something funny and also kind of like throw a wrench into it, throw a wrench into this like system. And for me, I got super radicalized in college, because like I went to this like small liberal arts school for a little bit. I ended up, dropping out and finishing somewhere else. And it was pretty close to the, where the whole Unite the Right thing happened. And so I showed up for like freshman year right after that. And dude, it was a disaster. Like I've said it before on my show, so I'll, fly through the story, but like they bring us in, small school, a couple hundred kids, break us into, men and women. And for the men, it was like a full on struggle session. Like there was this big, kind of double wide kind of woman, at the front. And she literally said, it's a phrase like burned into my head. 1 in 3 women on a college campus will be raped. Look to your right, look to your left. One of those men could be a rapist. I was like, what? Dude, I'm like 17, or I guess I was 18 barely, but like, hey, that's kind of a strong start, to your college experience. And to your point, right? You're like, okay, well, I can't be part of that. Like, there's no way for me to do that without, putting a dress on, I guess, but like, that's not an option. And so you're like, okay, well, I guess like the Republicans are my guys, and, there's some things that I do or don't like. And then to me, like the point where it was really like, okay, like this is the two options presented are non-viable was obviously the whole 2020 thing. Cause it was basically like, oh, like depending on your opinion, you can just turn off an election. You can change the way that we do things. And then you have, Joe Biden in. And I have a very distinct memory. I was helping one of my buddies move, and, the roof of his new place needed some repair. So we were just like, oh shoot, like we'll put a tarp over it until you can, get someone here to actually fix it. So I'm sitting on the roof with my best friend, and it's right when, Joe Biden was, kind of pushing out this whole thing of like, oh, if you don't have the thing, right? I can't say it. It's the one thing I've gotten a YouTube strike for. If you don't have the thing, you can't work, you can't get a job. So I was still in college at the time, and I was like, am I just like going to be like homeless or like part of the underclass, like some guy like begging for money because I won't do this? And it's like, oh, I guess that's how much they hate me. they're willing to do that. Like you can't even contribute to society. And I think that like a lot of guys, and it sounds like you're in kind of a similar position. You see like Trump come around for the third time, seems like he's going to win. And you're like, okay, like, all right, like maybe you learned some stuff. You learned who you couldn't trust, how you have to take on a government that hates you. And for like the first couple months, it's like, okay, like, I guess, I was a little cynical, but it seems like he's learned what you need to do. And then real quickly, all that goes away. And it's like, okay, so your one priority is a certain Middle Eastern democracy. That's what it comes down to. And so even when you as the millennials would say, right, you do the thing, you get your guy in, the big, anti-establishment guy. It's like, oh, okay. So nothing changes. So we just have no, solution within this system. And I mean, look, like, obviously I've been on the internet saying radical things well before that, but that's one of those ones where like, okay, so that's the state of play. And, I'm glad you brought up the age thing as well, because like one of my least favorite, I guess I actually do kind of like reading these, is the like endless number of like articles and opinion pieces about like, why are young men so radical?
Oh
and
my God.
The solutions are all completely insane. It's like, oh, we'll just find a chubby Hispanic woman to go to frat parties, and that'll, win them back over for, the Democrats or whatever. And I'm saying Democrat, Republican. We all know what I mean when I say that.
Yeah.
Right? But I'm curious, and maybe I can throw it back to you. Like, what's your answer to that question? Like, why are young men so radical?
See, this is something I've, because obviously I'm not like a younger Gen Z, I'm older Gen Z, but I'm still part of the same generation. And a lot of the problems the younger guys have, I guess like you and we got to experience those firsthand, when they first started kind of popping up. And I mean, the answer to that question isn't just one thing. It's not just political. It's not just one simple answer. You'll hear it from Republicans, for example, when they talk about it. They'll talk about young men and they'll say, you'll see some chick go on Fox News and talk about how young men just want to play video games and they don't want to, interact with society. They don't want to marry a single mom or, step up to the plate or whatever. And then when they talk about solutions, they always talk about like the economy, and they'll say stuff like, "Oh, we just need to give them the ability to buy a house if they could own a home, or it's the job, or it's the taxes. It's money." And they focus on that. And then for Democrats, it's they say the money, but then they have some weird thing where it's like men are brainwashed and they're just all misogynists, and that's why they're unhappy, and we just need to liberate them from that way of thinking, and then we can all be equal. So they're both like getting it wrong, because it's not just one reason why men are the way they are. A big reason is because of purpose. A lot of young men in today's society, they lack a purpose, and no amount of them being able to buy a home or have some corporate job that really is just a bullshit job, to be honest, that doesn't really matter, that can get replaced with AI in 10 years, is going to, fill that void. You have a generation of men that were demonized 100%. You had a generation of men that were kind of just abandoned. Even with today, like a problem the Republican Party has is they keep doing things that favor the older generations, like the boomers. And then they'll talk about how young men are angry because they can't afford a home, but then they won't enact policies that are going to bring home prices down. They'll give you a 50-year mortgage, but that's just about it. And they think it's money. They think it's because they can't afford things, but there's so much more. There's the purpose, that there's the idea of this country doesn't have a future. There's the idea that it's wrong for young men to be masculine, and it's wrong for young white men to be proud of being white. It's wrong for you to have a sense of identity and belonging. And these things give you purpose in a way. it's not just about money or affording a home. Also, another reason is, quite frankly, it is because of dating. It's because of relationships, not just between just the dating relationships, but also like friendships. I think young Gen Z men, there's some study I saw like a few years ago that talked about how like 15% of Gen Z men have no friends, like at all. They're chronically just online and they have nobody to talk to. And then our generation, we grew up when, if you want to talk about dating, because relationships, you know, that gives you a family, that gives you legacy, that gives you kids. It's kind of impossible at this point. Like, it's very screwed up. Like, ever since before I was old enough to date, there was a dating app. You know, before Tinder, there was Hot or Not. Before that, there was Facebook. And it's like feminists and the feminization of the country. It's a very radical ideology that's kind of rooted at the core of this nation. You even have Republican conservative women that are basically covert feminists, and they'll talk about all these issues with men, but they won't talk about problems with women and how a lot of women these days are kind of undateable. And it's not to say that men are completely dateable. There's a lot of problems that go both ways, but the reason why young men are so angry and there's so many issues is because it's not just one problem. It is the economy. It is the future. It is the fact that the leaders have completely abandoned the future of this nation and sold the future that's supposed to belong to the children to BlackRock and all these different companies. It's you know, we have a country that has no real like morals. There's no like real role models for young men either. With black families, you have like no fathers in the families, so they have no men to look up to. And then with white men and white kids, they have fathers that are basically just cucks, and they don't stand up for anything, and they don't believe in anything. And at the first sight of any type of conflict, they just kind of like cower. And you just have a lot of issues that have just been compounding throughout the decades, really. And Gen Z men are kind of reaching a powder keg moment where they're just angry. A lot of them are just checked out. And it is because, you know, they can't date. It is because they have no purpose. It is because, you know, a lot of them will go to college, they'll get a degree, they won't be able to find work. It is because they can't get home. So it is the economy as well, but you don't really have any leaders that are focusing on the real issues that men have. They think it's just, we can have them buy a house or whatever, and that's going to fix everything. And it's like, no, there's so much more, but nobody wants to have that conversation.
Well, I mean, and look, to that point, like a house is, obviously there's the literal thing of owning a house, right? Owning a property, having a stake in society, that's really important, right? Because then you own a piece of it, you're tied into it. But it's sort of symbolic of a bunch of other things, right? Like, you're 100% correct that like the money isn't all of it, but the fact that like it is incredibly difficult to find a decent job, you know, that many people are drowning in debt, you know, an ever greater portion of their income is being used to, you know, provide basic necessities. Like I was talking to Peruvian Bull, right? I think he's about our age, about exactly this. And he's super smart, you know, now he works as a, you know, financial analyst. So like he's, you know, a smart kid, right? And so I just asked him offhand, I was like, hey man, how many jobs have you applied for? And his answer was, I don't want to misquote him here, but he's like around 600.
Oh my gosh.
And like, look, like there's a reason I'm a professional internet guy. And that's because I had a very similar experience. Like, and this is obviously years ago, I'm not torn up about it, but like I graduated from a competitive program in a degree that people tell you to get, right? Like this is what you get if you want a job. I was working in a clothing factory. Like that was what I did after school. And look, like the economy sucks sometimes, it happens, but that feeling of hopelessness you're talking about, where it's like, what do I got to do to get ahead? Like, it feels as if, you're always behind the 8 ball. And, as regards dating, this is something that's really hard to express to people who didn't grow up in kind of the algorithm era, right? When it, cause look, like, even kind of like core and older millennials remember the before social media era, is that like that radically changes the playing field. Because again, one, you are basing a relationship, at least even if you get to that point, off of like fleeting momentary attraction, like not how you talk, not your social setting, whatever, just that. And also it plays into like negative traits in female psychology, which is like, oh, well, I string along a bunch of guys, just get the attention from it. And I think you're right to point out, like, look, like this, men and women both, if we want to even just break it down to those categories, both have very real problems. Like you can look at, the female rate of mental disorders and suicide, all of these things are getting worse. But like at a more basic level, one of the things that I think is kind of interesting about Gen Z is that many of the things that previous generations said they thought or said they would do, we were actually kind of forced to do. So like if you look at, boomers, and we're talking in aggregate, right? There's a huge generation. I know some of you are the good ones. So if you're listening to this, you are one of the good ones. But yes. Point is, like you see this huge gap between stated and revealed preference. What people will say if you call them on the phone, like I guess that's how they do polling still, and say like, what do you think about this? And how they actually live their life. The patterns of marriage and family formation, similar, slightly decreased with generations after that. But for us, like the kind of like war between the sexes it still is just raging. So like, look, like I'm married, I met my wife, young, common religious community, right? So I was sort of able to opt out of this, but like, that's not only incredibly unique, but like my friends didn't have that. Like my peers don't have that. And, going through college and we were dating, like I'd see my friends, her friends going through this and just getting chewed up by it. Like the guys who are, like I probably shouldn't say this, but like a guy I know who's, got a 6-figure job, owns a house, and was on like a good looking guy on like a 5-year cold streak, of just like nothing. And you're like, okay, look, like clearly this isn't working. And it's tough to talk to people who grew up in the before times because they'll give you this kind of pull yourself up by the bootstraps advice. And it's just incredibly infuriating to listen to it because you're like, look, man, like the situation has changed so dramatically from when, you were on the dating scene, so to speak. And it's doubly difficult because like if you're giving someone advice, it's actually not horrible advice given the limitations. Because look, man, like you or I can't fix this big problem, right? I can't do anything to solve the dating market. So within that limitation, being like, okay, well, like what can you do? Can you, improve how attractive you are, improve your prospects or whatever? Even if it's difficult, like within your power, that's probably your best bet. But at the same time, so often that is given in such a dismissive way of like, oh, men are useless. Why won't you get off your phone? Why are you buying avocado toast and $8 lattes? That it like completely blows up any possibility of like, how to actually move forward. And again, when I say like pull yourself up by your bootstraps is the best advice, I don't mean that's a great solution, but if you've got literally 2 cards to play, either do that or do nothing, it is technically better. But again, like it's a tough sell. And it's like, I understand why people get so upset about it, but I'll throw it back to you, Tom.
No, I mean, you're 100% correct. Like the only thing you can do if you're a young man is, better yourself. That's all anyone can do, not just men, but women. That's like the whole point is you wake up every day and you try to do better than you did the day before. And that's the only way anyone makes it. But when it comes to dating, especially when, like you said, when you talk to older generations, I kind of feel bad for older generations or older men, especially when it comes to them giving advice to like their sons when it comes to dating, because unless you have like a specific set of circumstances, like kind of how you said you met your wife young, you guys were in a religious group together. I have a friend who has pretty much the same story. He met his wife when they were both 14 at church. They only dated each other. They waited till marriage before they had sex. They got married at like 23. I was the best man at the wedding. And, you know, they don't have kids yet, but they're fixing to get a house. They're happy. They're in love. He's the only person I know out of all of my friends who was blessed enough to be in that circumstance. And he did follow all the advice that he should have done. He treated her respectfully. He never cheated on her. He was a man of God, all these different things. And, you know, he's going to be blessed for that. They're going to have a beautiful family. But he's the only one I know. And I know other guys that met, you know, women in church and when they were younger, and the relationships just didn't work out. My first girlfriend, and I actually got engaged to her when I was 19, that didn't work out, and I met her at church. And so after that, I did kind of go through the meat grinder. Yeah, the Tinder, the Bumble, the dating scene. And it kind of sucks because this society, because of social media and the internet, like this is a generation that is experiencing the algorithm. Like you said, that's never happened throughout history. It's the first generation to be raised on that, and it's completely alien to us. And so we're kind of responding to it in ways that's very unpredictable. Nobody can kind of figure out why certain things are happening until like it's too late, essentially. And the problem with like older generations when they try to give you advice, like older men, is that they give you really good advice. It's just the time isn't the same. A lot of young men, if they follow the advice for dating that their dad gives them, they're just going to get like screwed up. Like they're honestly going to get like completely, I'm trying not to
You're going to
say
get
the wrong
pepper
thing.
sprayed, to be honest. Like that,
Pepper
best.
sprayed at best. Yeah. But like, there's just a lot of ways, like women are just different because of social media, because of, and not even just younger women. You see this with older women too, that get divorced and try to re-enter the dating scene. It's different all around. And so the only way a lot of like young men have to succeed if they're not like in the right circumstance is you kind of have to be an asshole. That's like something you have to do. You have to play by a different set of rules if you want to get some type of reaction from women. And it doesn't necessarily make you a good person. That's why you see like a lot of guys who they get a lot of girlfriends or they date a lot. They don't keep them, and those relationships don't last that long because relationships nowadays for most people are just kind of for show. It's either just for sex or it's because the girl wants a boyfriend because all of her friends have boyfriends and that's why she has a boyfriend. But as soon as that fleeting feeling of happiness goes away, the relationship is over essentially. And if she doesn't break up with you, she's probably just going to cheat on you because she's already moved on to somebody else in her head, and vice versa. Guys can do the same thing. So relationships are just kind of like, it's honestly probably the biggest problem the West has in general. Like we can talk about the economy, you can talk about like political differences, but if we don't figure out relationships, we're not going to be able to save the country at all. Like it's just not going to be salvageable.
Well, I wrote a piece responding to David French, right, who's quite possibly the most owned man in existence. And you know, his whole thing was responding sort of vaguely, he didn't really understand it, to guys like you and I. The piece in the New York Times titled, you know, what happens if I refuse to admit that America's in decline? And, you know, one of the things he talks about, he's like, oh, well, you know, don't you know, like divorce is down from what it used to be. you know, and abortion is down. And it's like, well, cool, dude. But also like, why? Like, why is, you know, divorce down? And it's like, well, to be honest, dude, no one's getting married, like proportionally, even to, you know, just a few generations ago. Like you see this even on a much more basic level, like the percentage of, you know, Generation Z that hasn't even had sex, which look like, you know, I'm not going to say that like, you know, mass, you know, casual hedonic sex is like a great place for society to be, but it at least means that like people are interacting at like a some basic level. And it's really not the case. There have been a couple think pieces from, you know, kind of, you know, aging women talking about how, you know, public spaces have become female, right? Like they go to a restaurant and they say, I just see women together. And it's one of these things where it's like, you're right to point out like the isolation of men, but also like in a weird way, men and women have become like different political classes. And like the same way that like you hear communists talk about like the, you know, the workers of the bourgeoisie, where it's like they view themselves as a block with different interests. And, you know, going through school during COVID was, you know, just a mess. But, you know, I remember, I can't remember which election it was. Maybe it was, I don't think it would have been 2020. It was some, you know, off year election or whatever. But my wife doesn't vote, never voted, just doesn't care to. Right. And she was, you know, surrounded by other women who were, you know, as many are, quite progressive, and had a conversation where someone was like, I don't understand how women can't vote. Like, you're not even really a woman if you don't vote. The implication being vote Democrat. And I always thought that was kind of revealing, because it is like in the same way that like black means something literal. So like Clarence Thomas is biologically black, but he's not capital B black, right? The political identity, because he isn't, you know, on side on certain issues. Just an offhand example, but you sort of see the same thing with woman, where, you know, woman and men man seems to be kind of trending in the same direction, has become like, it has a dual meaning. And so there's like this political identity that goes along with it. And I noticed this with, you know, my buddies on, you know, social media apps, that there are almost no men with like political signs or political slogans in their dating app profiles, but there are a whole lot of women with them. And even if you don't count the direct ones where it's like, you know, Proud Democrat or Free Palestine or whatever, maybe we can work on that second one, but whatever. But like you see the other ones where it's like, you know, it'll be, and I don't really understand how this technology works for fairly obvious reasons, but it'll be things like you can respond to a question, you know, like my ideal man has blank. And one of the really common ones is, you know, he's in therapy, which, let's be honest, we all know what that's code for. Right. Yeah. It means that you are, you know, basically talking to a libtard at the tune of $100 an hour until you become one. And I think that, to your point, like that's a really deep problem, that like being a woman has become synonymous with progressive policies. And you mentioned it earlier, talking about, you know, female Republican influencers, where it's like, you know, sure, they may be, you know, ruby red and conservative on the outside, but you scratch them and you reveal a feminist. And I think that's like, that's a huge issue, man.
100%. What was that quote from 1984, George Orwell? Women are the swallower of slogans. That's just like their thing. So it's kind of like always a thing. They're very social creatures. I don't even know why I said creatures, but they're very social by nature. And so it is kind of like a performative thing. Like a lot of women, and I've dated a lot. I'm not going to go into specifics. I'm not trying to embarrass myself, but most of the women I have dated are liberal and they are feminists. I'm not that at all. So for me, I just avoid, or at least when I was dating certain women like that, I would avoid politics altogether. And a lot of them, like even the ones with the slogans and the stuff on their profile picture, most of them don't actually believe it, but it is kind of like a social status. Like they have to do it because all their friends are doing it, because they're social. Like they have to have a boyfriend because their friends have a boyfriend. They have to listen to this new song because all their friends are listening to this new song. They have to, it's, you know, it's for everything. But the ones that really do believe it, and I have dated some of those, it's like the most deranged stuff you'll ever encounter. I had this one girl I was over at her place this one time, and she was trying to convince me about this book she was reading about how men had never actually built anything in society, and it was always women. And it was the most.
So like we was, but for the Foyds, I guess.
The Foyds, we was building New York, dude. I was usually the way I would handle that is I would just kind of nod most of the time and just be like, "Oh yeah, wow, that's crazy," because I'm not trying to reveal like, "Hey, I voted for Trump," because that doesn't go over well. I did that once, and she blocked me, and then she unblocked me after like 2 months. But I would just not like talk about my politics. But when that girl told me that to my face, I couldn't control it. I was just like, what the fuck are you talking about? What do you mean? Have you ever been to a city? Have you ever been inside any building ever? Have you used the toilet?
Have you ever seen a construction worker before?
Have you used an iPhone? Like, what are you talking about? Men have never built any. And she was serious. And I wasn't like too mean, but I should have been a little bit more aggressive maybe. Because the ones that are into that, it is like a super religious thing. It is a religion. They've replaced religion with politics. And when you see women talk about how they want some liberal guy who goes to therapy, no, they don't. I actually, because of my job, I work with a lot of different types of people. And one of the guys I work with, he is a communist and he is a liberal dude. He's all that stuff that women say they want, and no girl wants to date him. In fact, he had a girlfriend at one point, and he would cry to me all the time, and he would say, "Oh, like my relationship's not going over well. I'm talking to my therapist about it. It's like, I think I should talk to my girlfriend about this." And he's like, I got to express my feelings more. And I told him this. I was like, look, when you do that stuff, I don't care how feminist your girlfriend is. When you do that stuff to her, it makes her less attracted to you. She doesn't want to sleep with you. She doesn't want to be around you. And he just would not believe it. And then like 2 months after I had that conversation with him, he came to me and he said, "Hey, my girlfriend had a conversation about how when I cry and stuff in front of her, it makes her not want to like touch me or be around me." And she like told him that, and then it made him cry even more. And I'm like, bro, you got to not listen to that advice. It's not good advice. All right. It's not going to, you need to just, and yeah, she ended up, breaking up with him, and it's been pretty brutal for him ever since. But there is a different political alignment that men and women have, and it is a religious tribal thing for the women, especially.
Well, and it's one of those things, and I get frustrated when I listen to, guys who, I don't know what they call themselves now, but like 10 years ago would have been like MRAs, right? The men's rights activists. Because like they'll say a bunch of stuff and it'll be like that complaint, and they'll be like, yeah, women need to change. And it's like, dude, one, not how that works for any number of reasons. But two, it's like that instinct to be like social enforcers in a different era is a very healthy thing, right? Like if you have, a relatively traditional society with, let's just say some semblance of normal human values, right? This doesn't have to be Western, just any society whatsoever. Like having half of your population that is really interested in enforcing those values makes a ton of sense. And in fact, you actually see this where in America, up until the 1970s, women were significantly more conservative than men. It's actually a relatively recent thing. And it kind of makes sense, right? Obviously in the era, before contraception, even on something like we'll just take like, sexual mores, women have a lot more at stake there, right? If you live in an era without, welfare, without access to contraception, if you have a kid, that's your problem. Not problem in that way, but you bear the consequence of that, where some guy can just hop on a train and never be seen again. So it makes sense. But the problem is, right, that the values of society, if you want to call them values, have been so perverted to the point where that healthy human instinct has been completely and totally perverted and twisted to enforce something that's completely messed up. And it's interesting. My buddy Daryl Cooper Martyr Made has this, he talks about this a lot, talking about how all of these cults rise up immediately in the wake of the hippie movement. And he's talking about this thing where you have people who grew up, these early boomers in a very traditional society, the kind of stereotypical 1950s where, okay, look, we understand it. There are problems. That isn't like the peak of human civilization, but comparatively, it was more traditional. And he talks about how like when that structure goes away, when all of a sudden you have people who are, kind of thrust into like the sexual marketplace, that becomes a much more real part of life. You have access to contraception, obviously all the other kind of, social ills that started in the 60s. Well, you create a bunch of broken people. You create a bunch of people who are looking for something. And so it's no surprise that, you have a bunch of cults, right? You have guys who are saying, I'll solve that problem. I'll give you that family unit. And I think you see a very similar thing with, extremely progressive politics. It's like, okay, well, and look, like the position of, young women is equally unenviable to young men. Sure, they have a better chance in the job market, but like really is being a corporate girl boss wage slave a good life? Like, no, not at all. Like that's a miserable way to live. But I think a big part of it is that in a very like synthetic, unhealthy way, those progressive politics become that sense of meaning. It's like, oh, here's what you should be doing with your life. Here's how you become a good person. And it like filters in. And for people who don't have a lot going on, who, are unlikely to have families or, really have anything fulfilling going on, like it makes sense. And like the real difference is that like for very obvious reasons, that system of belief, whatever you want to call it, like progressivism, woke, whatever, pick your term. Like it does not apply to young white men. And so, that same kind of social atomization that's affecting everyone is making women more progressive and, not necessarily for men. You think I realize I threw a bunch at you there, but I've just been kind of thinking about this for a while.
No, I mean, you're 100% correct. I like with women, it's not their fault they're like this. It's definitely, there's a lot of different elements and forces that kind of all came in together. Like what you said with the boomers kind of growing up, being introduced to birth control for like the first time in human history. It's kind of like the internet for us, it's something that never existed en masse like that. It's this new thing. It's going to have some radical effect on people, especially the younger generations. And then you also have like propaganda coming from Hollywood and all these different institutions kind of at the time that are pushing feminism and all these different things. But, you were right. Like with a lot of women, for a majority of pretty much all society, they're usually really conservative. I think even during the women's rights movements for the suffrage or whatever, most women didn't even want the right to vote. It was mostly men that actually got that passed. It was because that wasn't normal. That wasn't like a socially acceptable thing up until that point. So it's women are kind of like the ones that get pushed into accepting those things. But at this point, you have probably like the past like 2 or 3 generations where you do see feminism, liberalism, all these different things being pushed. And a part of it is that it was to, kind of lift up women while also at the same time lifting up minorities and minority men. And then when it came to white men, it was always kind of about attacking them. And that's why you see with a lot of younger men in general, not even just white young men, you see a lot of them tend to be more conservative because it's a rejection of like the propaganda and the social engineering that has been compounding the past couple generations. Because with young white men and Gen Z especially, and even millennials, they get attacked for just being men, just being white. And then for non-white young men, they're getting attacked for being masculine and for, questioning things. And it's just kind of like it's also like the lack of purpose as well. Like a lot of young men are finding purpose in more traditional values, especially religion. And I think Gen Z as a whole is probably, I keep seeing a statistic where it says they're becoming more religious than past generations, like younger men.
Well, and one of the interesting things on this, both a solution and a problem, is one, this is the first time in, I think it is roughly 300 years of statistics, where men are more religious than women. That is very, very uncommon and interesting. But one of the like even within that population of people who regularly go to church, there's an interesting split, because young men are going primarily to extremely traditional denominations. So you've seen, obviously, the Ortho Bros are a growing thing.
Yep.
All of my Orthodox friends are very kind. I'll leave it at that. Obviously, the tradcasts, and then the more kind of stringent forms of Protestantism. But what you're seeing is another bifurcation, where a lot of these kind of evangelical megachurches, the whole sneakers with preachers phenomenon, like the stuff you see tradcasts raging about on the internet, those churches are heavily female, and the traditional denominations are heavily male. Obviously not all, but again, even in that trend, we see this same bifurcation, male to female. But I interrupted, Tom. Back to you.
No, you're 100% correct. And I actually, because I was raised in a mega Judeo-Christian church, so when I was raised in that, I know exactly what you're talking about, because I got to see like those numbers change, and then I left and I became an atheist for a while, and then I became an agnostic, and then I got saved again a few years ago. So, thank God. But in that church, like in these mega churches, another thing you also see is with the men that are there, a lot of them are basically, they're gay or they're closeted. And I'm not even trying to say that to just be offensive. I'm actually just being honest. So you have a lot of women, and the church as a whole, this is another thing. It's not just conservatives that have covert feminism, but it's definitely the religious institutions, the mega churches. They're basically like feminist institutions. They'll push a lot of questionable doctrine, and they'll use the Bible as a way to push that. And it supports a lot of women's behavior, like modern women's behavior, because right now you have a problem with a lack of accountability for women. And you also have a problem where the state can kind of take care of women, and so that's why they don't need men as much. But because of the trends of where things are going, men are becoming more traditional, going to actually more traditional churches, not following those same trends as women, becoming more conservative, and not even just like the establishment conservative. They're becoming more dissident right, you could say. Because of that, eventually you will find, I feel like, more women following that path. And you see that even like online. You see a lot of women kind of repeating the same type of rhetoric that you'd see. You see a lot of young women that are starting to like Nick Fuentes and like all these different people, because that's like a trend. Like they're going to the churches, they're going to the RNC conventions, and they're not finding their husband because all the men aren't going there anymore. They're going somewhere else. And it is kind of crazy that like you have all these splits, and you have the differences with politics, and then now you have the differences with religion, and it's just constantly just splitting more and more. You have women that are going off, becoming girl bosses, and then you have a lot of men that are just checking out of society, and they're just like, you know what, whatever. And it's very interesting, but it's definitely, in my opinion, probably the biggest problem our society has. And whether or not it can be fixed just by, waiting it out, or through propaganda, or, whatever, because propaganda works on women. That's the problem. Like, that's the reason why they are the way they are
dude.
today.
Like, have you caught this whole like clavicle saga or whatever. I'm bringing this up for a reason.
Yeah, the clav. Yeah, he's a very interesting character. I think he's really funny, but
I do too. I just want to say here at the Jay Burden Show, you should not smoke meth to make your cheekbones look better. I'm not a medical doctor, but I believe that is.
Yeah,
but
don't
the reason
smash
I bring
your
that
face
up,
with a hammer.
Well, that's exactly what I was going to say, because like when I was on like super weird weightlifting forums and like fit back like 10 years ago, bone smashing was a meme. Like it was a joke. And like so many of those very niche things, and you see this in health and wellness in particular, have like hit the algorithm and gone mainstream in a really weird way. And there's this meme, but it's true. I mean, it's my relationship and many others, right? It's racist boyfriend, crunchy girlfriend, right? The girl who's into, like alternative health and all that. And so to your point about propaganda, I mean, it's basically where a lot of it starts. You see the like, and I hate the term tradwife for like 6 different reasons, but like that whole meme complex, around, the kind of like purity. And it starts often. And it's funny because even like the progressive press realizes this. They talk about how, natural cosmetics are a gateway to the alt-right. And I realize like that word doesn't mean anything, but they're identifying something real. That the leap from the kind of like, hippie, the government's trying to poison you through the food or, some medical treatment or whatever, to a more traditional view, that's not a huge jump really. And you're seeing a lot of that again through propaganda. I think additionally, one of the trends that I think has been kind of fun to watch is effectively like all human politics is patronage, right? Patron client, you give me this for that. Like it a lot of it comes down to that. And as like things get worse, right? As the economy gets worse, as AI and then legal immigration, which is what we were supposed to be talking about. We haven't even mentioned it 95% of the way through the show. But as those trends continue, the bribes, the quality goes down. And all of a sudden, you're not, you don't have this cool job where you can, sit on your laptop in the pool as a project manager. That doesn't exist anymore. And so that bribe, right, that patronage being offered, that deal gets worse. And all of a sudden, right, you have an opening, right? Like that's an opportunity for propaganda to work because, the old line, like it's very difficult for a man or a woman in this case to notice something he's paid not to, right? He's bribed to stay kind of, as, Andrew Tate would say, in the matrix. But like when that capacity goes away, when there isn't all that surplus in the system to keep bribing people to have those kind of laptop jobs or, as the meme goes, Jew daycare, right? If you don't have the money to keep that going like that, I think that there's an interesting opening there. I don't know. That's more speculative. And I think that that's a trend we're at the kind of early end of, but yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see how much of those values, which are synthetic, like they are pushed because, that's what's high status. That's what good people do. How much of that goes away when the money dries up? Just me kind of spitballing there.
No, I mean, yeah. I think the big question is how many people are going to double down because they were drinking the Kool-Aid and they kept drinking it and now the money's gone and the propaganda's gone, but they're still left with the fact that they were drinking the Kool-Aid and they're telling all their friends about it for the past 12 years. So they don't want to look stupid. And, people, because we're very prideful, they will double down on things. So it's kind of crazy to see because this society, because of the propaganda towards women, it's pushed younger women, especially, into certain areas that are they're very radical. Like a big portion of women are getting into sex work and doing stuff like OnlyFans. I know a ton of girls that I grew up with. Like it's actually insane. And I know this is anecdotal, but it's insane how many women I know personally that I grew up with that got into OnlyFans. It's actually it's crazy. And most of them still don't do it anymore, because if any of them made money doing it, they couldn't continuously make money because it's very competitive and it's a business, and they don't think of it like that when they get into it. But the pictures and the videos are online and they stay online forever. So they've kind of, they put some mileage on, essentially. And because of that, it pushes them into different areas. They become radical feminists. They become radical liberals. They get into all these different weird beliefs and stuff. And so when the propaganda dies down, when all of that goes away, are they going to change? I feel like a lot of them will, because a lot of them do want those traditional families. They want kids, but how many are not, How many are going to just continuously push all these things because they couldn't be wrong?
Well, dude, like this is what I think about the troons, right? The guys who have bought into this. Am I going to get a strike for saying guys? Whatever. I said troons. Whatever. The people.
Talking about cartoons.
This is parody. The people who've bought into this more than anything else, who've literally, put their bodies on the line. And we understand, right, that these people are literally hooked up to a medical drip for the rest of their lives at taxpayer and also personal expense. And you see this in the detransitioners. My buddy Benjamin Boyce, he interviews a lot of people who detransition, and I'm not going to pretend to listen to all of them, but if you listen to a couple of them, you'll pick up on really interesting things. And one of the things that they talk about is that this immense feeling of buy-in. And it's like leaving a cult where, if you go out, not only are you all of a sudden having to pay yourself, your insurance won't cover detransitioning or getting off of this. So that's a element of buy-in, but also you're a traitor. Everyone you have surrounded yourself with thinks you're scum of the earth. And especially when on the front end of that, when you're going through your transition, you're encouraged to, cut people out of your life, to socially isolate yourself. Like those people are bought in, and you see it in, this kid that shot Charlie Kirk, who's obviously involved in a bunch of weird gender stuff through his boy or girlfriend. I get confused talking about this, but also, right, like that kid who shot like 3 Hondurans, trying to take out an ICE center.
Where it's like shot himself.
Yeah, it's basically like all of these, and again, these are, let's be honest, young white men who are experiencing the same sort of radicalizing forces we've been talking about, but they were able to buy in to the progressive plantation at the cost of their bodies, and now they are more bought in than anyone else. They're in these kind of like pressure cookers, and so like you basically have like sleeper cells all across America, and not just in liberal areas, because thanks to the wonders of the internet and algorithms, you can have a kid in a 300 person town in Alabama who sees the same content as some blue-haired barista from Brooklyn. And so like, dude, that's a huge problem. And when we're talking about buy-in, like those are the most bought in people in the world. They are physically dependent on, like the libtard Reich, basically. Like their body stops working if they don't get their, government sponsored hormones. Like they'll literally either die or, have very serious medical complications, let alone all the psychic brainwashing and, the social dynamics too. And I think that like, if we're talking about like, who can come back, right? Who can normalize? To be honest, man, like, look, like this is going to be the most sexist thing I say on this. Women don't really have political opinions in the same way. It's a different, 100%. It's a different thing. And so like, this is funny. I've said this before. It'll make her mad if she hears it, but like, how like on your iPhone, it'll show you like your memories or whatever. My wife found one from like 2015, right? She was a teenager or whatever, but it said something like, don't try and get with me if you can't get with my feminist agenda or whatever. And she's looking back on this, 10 years later, like just cringing out of her skin, so embarrassed, married to a niche, right-wing internet edgelord. And so the point is like, that's largely salvageable. Like, okay, whatever, we can work with that. But like the troon, the guy who's, cut his dick off to be blunt, who's medically dependent on the state. It's like some of those guys will come back and, there are detransitioners, but like that's basically like an army. okay, like a mentally unwell, physically frail one, but still like enough to, grab grandpa's hunting rifle and like ventilate someone's gardener.
Mm-hmm. No, 100%. And I mean, they're making militias, they're making groups. It's all over the internet. It's a thing. I did a stream with Focus Trip. He's a gun YouTuber. Surprisingly enough, I'm actually connected with a bunch of gun YouTubers.
Okay, funny thing, I've actually also talked to Focus Trip. So this is a weird connection, but yeah,
I love him. I love him. But he's actually one of the reasons why I blew up, because they reacted to one of my videos and then they brought me on to like interview me. And I got to meet like a whole bunch of like his friends. And so I'm connected with like a lot of those guys. And we talked about those militia groups, the Troon militia groups. And it's crazy, dude. Like they really are training, and it is a thing, they are bought in, and they are just like sleeper soldiers all over the US, and they don't care. If they're willing enough to do whatever they believe in, they'll gladly sacrifice their life to take anybody out. It's like, crazy.
Especially when, like, let's be honest, it's not like these guys have a lot going on. Like they are like socially isolated, terminally online. And so like all that rhetoric around, fascism and like the threat to our democracy, it's like, yeah, sure. Your liberal aunt says that. and she says that, but does she believe it to the degree where she's going to, pick up a rifle? No, she doesn't, for any number of reasons, let alone the fact that, this hypothetical person's 55 years old. But like, you take a socially maladjusted loser, right? Someone who is, partially due to their own actions, partially due to the sort of systemic issues we've talked about, dropped out of society. You dope them up on SSRIs, exogenous hormones, and surround them with other mentally unwell freaks. And then, tell them this guy is literally going to genocide you. Like all the rhetoric around like transgenocide or whatever. Like, yeah, no shit, dude. Like this stuff is like, this is going to happen. And honestly, like I've been kind of surprised it hasn't happened more. Like there's a specific example you're talking about. There's this article in Wired magazine. I did a stream talking about it with my buddy Carl, and it's exactly that. Like it's this progressive magazine talking about these, like, they call them 2A for all, but these like,
I think I've seen that.
Yeah. And it's in like the most fawning language, just gratuitously talking about how cool and glamorous this a militia is. And, you got to understand, the audience of Wired magazine is not the people who are in that, but it's for like the normal progressives is kind of like this signaling of like, oh, this is a cool thing. This is glamorous. This is bashing the fash or whatever. I realize that term's 15 years out of date, but you know what I mean? And like, dude, like you're already seeing this with this, funny enough, lesbian who got, shot in, in Minnesota, where it's like, this is a powder keg. And like, I'm honestly surprised we've gotten, relatively speaking, the minimal amount of political violence we've already have.
Oh yeah. It's going to get worse for sure, especially coming from like those groups. And I mean, like with a lot of those Troons as well, and I'm not going to say this is all of them, but a lot of them, they do that stuff for attention, especially from females. Because a lot of women nowadays, they'll see somebody doing that and they'll give them support and they'll give them attention and they'll be like, oh yeah, you're so strong, you're so beautiful. And it gives them attention that they never had because they are isolated, they are alone, they are put on all these drugs. And it's just not going to lead to anything good or fruitful whatsoever. And it's not normal, so it's never going to be fully accepted by society. So it's always going to lead to something like this. But that's going to be a pretty big challenge. But I would also argue that, and yeah, like women, like you said, they don't really have political beliefs. But that's why, it's not really politics. It's like a religion to all these people. It is a tribe. It is tribalism. It's almost as if it is a race thing for them. They are on one side of the aisle and you disagreeing with them. You're on the other. You're the enemy. you must be killed, you must be destroyed. At the very least, your ideology must be dominated, because your ideology, your beliefs lead to death, and it takes away women's rights, and it takes away Troon's rights, and it suppresses liberty or whatever. Like, they have all these different examples. And so for a lot of women that are getting radicalized as well, like you talked about the lesbian in Minnesota, I mean, women are getting pushed pretty far too. They might not be going through surgeries, but they're doing things that are pretty bad. They're, like I said, the sex work thing. You have a lot of women that are getting into OnlyFans, and if they're not doing OnlyFans, they're being pressured into doing certain sex acts or doing things like going to group stuff. I don't want to say the word on YouTube, but like you have a lot of women that get radicalized and pushed to do things that they probably would not have done if they weren't programmed to do so. And so you're going to have them mixed with the Troons kind of doubling down, even when the propaganda stops, because they're going to still talk to each other and hang out with each other and isolate with each other. And they're just going to it's going to be like a feedback loop. The propaganda doesn't stop. Like, they're going to still feed into each other's delusions, and you will see more and more violence coming from this. And it's going to be mostly coming from the men, of course, because men are the ones that are more often, capable of violence. But it's very scary, man, because I'm somebody who likes to go out. I like going out. I like going out with friends. I like going to concerts. I like going out and dancing. I'm a very festive, social person. But recently, I've had to like think twice about going to certain places, because it's like something could go down. There could be some crazy person there that could actually just go off. There could be a bomb. There could be whatever. Like, society in America, like it's getting very violent, and it's very disturbing.
Dude, to that point, like, I realize it's poor form to talk about weapons and right-wing politics in the same conversation for obvious reasons. Not that it's ever stopped me, but like, I carry a gun for a number of reasons, but it was never something I did at church until like that sort of flurry. You remember the really bizarre instance of that Catholic church shooting, right, where the shooter was drawing pictures of demons and occult symbology and all that.
Dude, yeah, that was crazy.
Yeah, and so you start to look at that and you're like, okay, like, sure, is that political violence in the same way as saying, writing, a leftist slogan on a bullet and, blasting it at the head of TPUSA? Like, well, yes and no. And it's like clear that, for people of that persuasion, like, religious communities are a target. Like, I know a religious school in the area that I'm vaguely connected to who has a surprising amount of security for exactly that reason. I mean, you saw the Audrey Hale, one of the few, female shooters, shot up that Christian school. But like, it's clear, because even after Roe versus Wade was overturned, right? Again, conservative area, conservative church, but like, there were cars in the parking lot that got their tires slashed and their mirrors broken off in the middle of the service. And you're like, okay, that's not like the biggest deal in the world. Like, okay, you may have to file for insurance. That sucks. But like, that's a sign of something, right? That place is a target. People are aware of that and have antipathy towards that. And yeah, man, like, I don't think that's going anywhere. If anything, I think it's, heating up. And like, I think that it's clear that there is someone, whoever they is, we can maybe talk about that later, or, dig into it after the fact. But like, there was an attempt to turn this woman who got, blasted in Minnesota into like, a similar like George Floyd situation, an effort to like cynically use that to promote political violence. And again, it's like, look, like, I don't have anything in common with those people, but like, political violence is bad for everyone. Like, I don't want to live in a country where there's like it's like the Italian years of lead, right? Just like a running gun battle in the street. But at the same time, like the temperature is not decreasing. And so, yeah, man, I think like to me, that's one of the trends that I've been watching. I mean, dude, even going back to the first Trump administration, when Antifa suddenly sprung into existence, it's like, well, like this is not a good thing to have happen in society, you know, regardless of your political opinions.
No, 100%. It's, and I mean, we've been talking constantly about it, you know, politics and all these different things, but it is obviously spiritual at the same time. 100%. There is spiritual warfare going on in this country. A lot of people do not like talking about that because it's very uncomfortable for a lot of people to talk about, because it's almost impossible for everybody to comprehend what that is. But there is obviously something spiritual with this. When you see somebody who's a troon, who's drawing pictures of themselves being a demon in their journal and talking about how they've wanted to end it all for a long time, and they decide, I'm going to go to a school with a bunch of little kids and I'm going to just start shooting them. There is something more. It's not the fact that they hate these people because these religious people don't like abortion or they don't accept my way of life or whatever. There is something more. People are being compelled to do these things on some level. I know a lot of people are going to disagree with me. A lot of people don't like talking about that. I get it, but it's just true. And, you know, it's not stopping and it's not going to stop. This is going to get worse. And unfortunately, I don't think we've seen even half as bad as it's probably going to get. I think the future of this country, especially in regards to violence in general, it's just going to heat up more and more. And we just have to realize, as like men, whether younger men, older men, we're entering harder and harder times in this nation. You know, our life, our, you know, time on this earth is not going to be easy. We're going to be tested by a lot of different things, and this is one of them. And I truly do believe it is a spiritual aspect, because people are being compelled by so many different forces, and they're abandoning God. And even in a lot of the churches themselves, these mega churches, these aren't real. What they're teaching people isn't real. It's fake. It's for show. It is pushing political agendas. It is pushing, you know, heresy in a lot of ways. And I'm not going to comment on which church does what. That's not for us to talk about here, I guess, today. That could be a whole other conversation, but it is true. So now you have people who are turning to religion, and it's not even honestly real. It's hollow and it's fake. And you have people that need a purpose. They need a belonging. And you see these troons, you see these people, they find that in these communities. And a lot of these communities are designed to groom people and to essentially radicalize them to become violent. That's something people don't like talking about, but there's a lot of these groups all over the internet, and that's their whole goal, is to just get people to become violent and to do things to other people or to themselves. And that's evil. Like, there are people like I'm not going to say the specific names because I don't want to talk about it, but there's certain groups where that's their whole MO. They go on to mental health forums. They go on to sites like Roblox or, you know, Fortnite, all these different games, and they look for kids that are struggling. They befriend them, they get them onto Discords, and then they start, you know, befriending them and all these different things. And then essentially they get the kids to send them stuff that they shouldn't send them, and then they start exploiting them. And then sometimes they get the kids to do violent things to either other people or to animals or to even themselves. And the whole purpose, the whole reasoning behind these groups doing these things is simply because they're nihilistic and they just hate society and they hate people. There's something evil in that.
Oh, yeah. And look, like, I realize, you know, it's also weird because and I think the government's calling it like violent nihilistic extremism, which is stupid government term, but you do see this genuine like edgelord horseshoe theory, or it's like Satan worshiping neo-Nazi communist troons, like the most incoherent, random ideology all thrown together. I did a series. I can't remember the guy that I did it with. I've been doing this longer series with my friend Thomas77 about occult violence in the U.S. going back to the 50s and 60s. So people are interested can go look that up. But also I did a show talking about the Order of Nine Angles.
Oh, yeah.
Is one of several instances. And that's a weird one because it's always difficult to say, like, how much of this real, how much of this is edgy, for attention stuff on the internet. And people can debate that among yourselves. But like, nonetheless, there is a deliberate targeting and grooming operation to get kids in, get them to incriminate themselves, get them to basically buy into this and then do something horrible, which is the same mechanism that we see with the trans stuff, we see with the, like the sex work stuff or anything else. It's this idea of compromising yourself so that you're bought in, right? It's like, it's the same thing as like, fraternities do this where they like, they make a bunch of guys do some minor crime together, like steal a sign. And that's harmless enough, right? It's mischief. But the idea is you're bonded in that, right? It's like you're blooded in, you've made your bones, as like a criminal organization would say. Yeah, man. And I'm glad you brought up Roblox because look, I was never really a Roblox kid. I lived out in the middle of nowhere without internet. So, I got to it late, but like that and many other platforms are very clearly facilitating this. And I mean, Discord again, right? The Charlie Kirk shooting, others have been basically planned and facilitated on Discord. And look, man, you've been around for long enough, same as I, you're aware that if you or I take our opinions to a certain degree and post certain symbols, we'll be nuked from orbit. Like I've had accounts nuked on Discord for being in a server with a guy that got nuked. Like I didn't even say anything. But that stuff's fine. And to your point about this being sort of like a religious war, a war of belief, it just, as we wrap this up, like one of the things I think that's kind of like, you could almost look at it as like darkly comedic or like a silver lining to this cloud. It's like, well, everyone agrees, like even Jordan Peterson 10 years ago agreed that young men are facing a crisis of meaning, where it's like, okay, like you're like Alex Jones is directionally true. You're fighting satanic pedophiles. Like,
yeah,
that's some meaning to your life. Like that's something to do, right? That's more than just pure nihilism. And so there's a weird way in which it's almost like, I wonder if that will, create the purpose that many young men need. Not, just the like ultra edgelord stuff on the internet, but like the fact that like this is becoming a like very, and I'm choosing my words carefully here, but like a genuine like religious struggle between more than two, but like mutually incompatible visions of what it is to be a country, what it is to be a man, what it is to be human, even, right? If you look at the like crazy transhumanist stuff and like, I don't know. I think that, the turn to religion is in many ways a reaction to that. But Tom, man, we have gone over time. This has been a great conversation. So we mentioned, obviously, you have a YouTube channel, but what do you do on it and where else can people find you?
Oh, yeah. Well, I have a YouTube channel. I just do political conversation pieces. I record my thoughts on like pretty much whatever. If it's something that just recently happened in the news or if it's issues kind of like what we've been talking about. And it's basically just me having a conversation. That's kind of how I see it. It's like I'm having a conversation with whoever's watching the video. And it's very simple, very bare bones. It's nothing crazy, no fancy editing. Every once in a while, I'll do something. But that's pretty much it. I just have think pieces and I don't write scripts or anything. It's just kind of like my unfiltered thoughts. And I just discuss like different issues and problems. And I have it on YouTube as well as Rumble. And you can find me on YouTube and Rumble at just Tom Foe. I believe there's only one other person that has Tom Foe on YouTube, and he stole my name, and he makes music. But you'll get me first when you look it up. And on Rumble, it's just Tom Foe. And then I'm on X. I'm pretty active on X as well. And that's under TomFo1, and that's where you'll get you just find the picture of the chicken, and that's where I'll be at. But no, man, like I really am grateful that I got to come on here and have this conversation with you. I'm sorry we didn't get to talk about the 2 topics that we were like wanting to discuss, but this was very interesting. I feel like we could definitely do this again for sure.
Oh, 100%, man. I'll have to have you on again. It's funny because every time, and I understand why people, ask me like, hey, what are we going to talk about? And I always kind of like internally smile because I'm like, this is what I say we're going to talk about. We'll see what happens. But man, one more thing, and then we'll wrap this up. But it's funny you talk about, getting on the internet and finding someone else that shares your name. My name, no one else has, but my old profile picture, which I just found, it turns out, and it's a very similar to the one I have now, but it turns out it was just an image I found on the internet that was originally from some like 19-year-old art student in Korea who'd done this study. And all of a sudden I see this kid like freaking out. He's like, wait a minute, what have you done with my art? Why are you associating me?
Bro.
And so I changed. I didn't even think about it, right? Like you just pick a photo. And then when you realize it's literally in some kid's resume, you're like, okay, well that sucks. I'm sorry. I will change it. The damage is done, I guess. But yeah, understandably, he did not want the association, and I guess I don't blame him. But yeah, everyone should check out TomFo stuff. It's great. I'll have it linked in the description. As far as my stuff, the Jay Burden Show, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, anywhere you listen to podcasts. If you want to support me, because this is what I do, throw me a few bucks a month on Patreon, Substack, or Gumroad. You get the episodes early and ad-free. Look, I know the ads are annoying, but like I got a mortgage, man. I got to make money somehow. And if you want to opt out of it, I think it's like 20 cents an episode when you do the math. It's really not particularly expensive. So that's the way you can get out of it. You can also check out our sponsor, Axios Remote Fitness Coaching. I was talking to JD actually this morning. In addition to obviously like the group chat and the workout stuff, where you can call me gay, which is really the main reason I think people use that group chat. You also get access to JD, who's very good at what he does, and he'll check up on you. Right? Like he was just saying like, hey man, how's this working? Which, again, for what you pay is a pretty good deal. And JD's a friend. And look, he supported me for years now. So you should support him. Again, Tom, man, this was great. We'll have to have you back on sometime.
Oh, for sure. Definitely. Thank you, man. I really appreciate it.
To everyone at home, keep your head up. Life can't last forever. Good night.